I often hear people describe Chaos Child as a perfect sequel to Chaos Head Noah, and just as often, I hear people describe Chaos Child's true end, Silent Sky, as one of the greatest visual novel endings ever. But what if I told you that Chaos Child itself had a sequel just as good as the main story? And no, I'm not talking about the sequel visual novel Love Choo Choo. I'm speaking of Children's Revive, one of the final major pieces of Chaos Child side material ever released. Written by the game's lead writer, Eiji Umehara, it's an epilogue light novel for the main story, and the ultimate send-off for the Chaos Child subseries. In all honesty, I do not think someone's experience with Chaos Child is truly finished until they read Children's Revive. For as perfect of an ending as Silent Sky is, the main visual novel still leaves some loose threads that I imagine many fans would have been wondering about. At least I did, for the 7 years in between when I finished Chaos Child and when I got around to reading Children's Revive. After all, what happened to all the cast members after the end of the main game? That is the question that Children's Revive addresses. Given its reception, for a good while, English-speaking fans campaigned to J-Novel Club to get Children's Revive an official English release, eager to read such a highly acclaimed novel. Unfortunately, the company refused due to the poor sales of the localization of Occultic 9, whose third volume had a measly 21 pre-orders on Amazon. Thus, with attempts at petitioning for an official localization having been abandoned, fans turned to translate it themselves. And after several years of being in the works, SciTV fan translation group NS2C released their translation of Children's Revive just a few months ago. And as of the day I'm uploading this video, it happens to be Chaos Child's 11th anniversary, so I figured this would be as great an occasion as any to discuss what I believe is one of the greatest pieces of SciTV side material ever. Spoiler warning for the main story of Chaos Child. Children's Revive is an incredibly heartfelt and cathartic end to the journeys of the entire Chaos Child cast, taking place after the events of Silent Sky. It features 6 chapters, each focusing intently on one of the Chaos Child side characters, specifically Uki, Hana, Hinae, Mio, Senri, and Serika. In between the first several of those chapters are also intermissions from the perspective of Senri. So it's fully a character story, in a manner that doesn't make it feel very SciTV-like, and yet also just as thematically rich as the series' mainline entries. I think that the main story of Chaos Child is already extremely character-focused as it stands, but I still hear some occasional complaints from people that some of the side characters are a little under-characterized in the main game. But I can assure you that you probably won't have those sorts of complaints in Children's Revive. It's entirely focused on the cast and the social commentary. This novel is like a character study on everybody other than Takeru. I don't think that the social commentary is as strong or prevalent as it is in the main game, but it definitely builds off of what the main game establishes, and there's certain moments in Children's Revive that heavily recontextualize what Chaos Child is about thematically. And at the end of the day, what Children's Revive hammers home is that the villain of Chaos Child is not truly Serika or Sakuma or Wakui or even Takeru himself. It's society. In all honesty, because of how pivotal the content of this novel is, part of me wishes that Mages included its contents in the main game. And the ironic thing is that the other Chaos Child game that did come into fruition is self-admittedly an almost entirely superfluous addition to the series storyline, a sequel Chaos Child did not need. While it does have a tiny bit of setup for later entries, and it does tie in with some overarching series themes, the majority of it serves little purpose. Then meanwhile, Children's Revive, the sequel with legitimately vital content, is just side material that most people end up skipping. But let's go over that content, shall we? Spoiler warning for the entirety of Children's Revive. From the very beginning of the story, with Senri's heartfelt letter to Takeru, I was hooked. And past that point, once we got into the character-focused chapters, I was so pleasantly surprised by how compelling they were. As much as I love the main game, one of my biggest gripes with it is that the character roots are a bit inconsistent in quality, and despite having those entire chapters dedicated to character exploration, I just did not find every character in the main story to be equally compelling. But what Children's Revive did was make even some of the most stale characters from the main game immensely profound. And honestly, I wasn't expecting that at all from the likes of Uki and Hana, the latter of whom was a very last-minute addition to the story of Chaos Child in the first place. And yet they have some of the strongest chapters in the entire novel, stronger than a lot of mainline sci TV in my opinion. Normally, I'd conduct a review giving a breakdown of what I liked and disliked, but to be honest, there was hardly anything I could think of in this novel that I didn't like, so I'll give my thoughts on each of the novel's chapters one by one. First up, the Uki Chapter, which focuses on the Aoba dorm siblings in the aftermath of Takuru's arrest. What are their lives like being the siblings of both a murder victim and the so-called perpetrator of said murders? How does society treat them? How do they survive without Sakuma around to fund them? What are their dreams? What is it they hope to achieve with their lives? This chapter addresses all those questions, showcasing the challenges they face in the aftermath of Takuru's arrest. From Uki to Yuto to Senri, everybody is characterized incredibly. And in addition, this chapter also introduces one of my favorite characters in the entire Chaos series, Komori. Komori is introduced as a caregiver, but is secretly an officer from the Community Safety Division of Tokyo Police, trying to gather more information about the family. And the interactions between Komori and the guarded Aoba dorm siblings are a real treat to read. The way the relationship shifts from amicable to tense to amicable again is unbelievably compelling. It's especially moving emotionally to see the tension when Komori badmouths Takuru, entirely in the dark about the truth behind the murders. And then afterwards, the scene where Komori confronts the boy who assaulted Yuto is incredible. I gained so much respect for her there. But by far, my favorite part of Komori's interactions with the cast in this chapter is in a series of conversations centered around adulthood. Komori repeatedly emphasizes that Senri, despite only being 19, acts like way more of an adult than herself. And eventually, Senri comes to ask what it means to become an adult in the first place. Is it when you turn 20? Is it when you're financially independent? When? And in this conversation, she gives a bit of insight that completely recontextualizes what Chaos Child itself is actually about. After all, why is Chaos Child called Chaos Child in the first place? It's not just because of Chaos Child Syndrome, it's because the story is fundamentally about what it means to become an adult. As Senri sums it up, Takuru defeated CCS because he became an adult. And that's genuinely so poetic, that Takuru broke out of the delusion synchro and Chaos Child ended when it did, because he was no longer a child. That gives the original game and Takuru's character arc a whole new meaning. What an amazing start to the novel. After the Uki chapter is Hana's chapter, which was yet another surprise. For the majority of the main game, Hana is left in the background, not doing or saying much. Yet in Children's Revive, we get an entire chapter dedicated to her actually making a friend, a girl named Hatsuyama Mizuki. At first, it just seems she's sweet and that the two of them have a common interest in video games. But as it turns out, Mizuki has this very twisted perception of Takuru and Ito, believing both of them to be guilty, and yet still revering them as gods among mortal men, insinuating that they served this greater noble purpose to send a warning message to society, telling them to wake up. Such would tie into the main game's themes on internet culture and the world in an age of misinformation, with how desensitized the internet and really a lot of society are to the horrific loss of people's lives. After all, it's not just Mizuki, but a whole subset of the internet that genuinely believes in those kinds of conspiracy theories. But hearing Takuru and Ito badmouthed and mischaracterized by Mizuki of all people makes Hana absolutely furious. And that was honestly so incredible to see because it shows just how much they meant to her. For the other remaining members of the newspaper club, they'd more or less gotten used to the Takuru badmouthing by society. But not Hana. It drives her crazy, and so she ghosts Mizuki, as I imagine any of us would. But when she suddenly disappears off the face of the planet, seeing Hana run off to find her in spite of those feelings was just so amazing to see. And the confrontation between Hana and Mizuki was one of the best parts of the novel. As it turns out, Mizuki shut herself indoors, not just because of the falling out between her and Hana, but because people had secretly been taking pictures of Mizuki, doxing her, and mocking her condition on the internet. But all the while, she still clutches to this baseless image of Takuru and Ito, as if that would make any difference in the doxing and harassment. And in this exchange, Hana stands up to Mizuki and challenges her beliefs, not for the sake of herself or defending Takuru, but for Mizuki's sake. And my goodness, that was when I really came to appreciate Hana as a character. And I also increasingly appreciated Mio as a character, with her anti-doxing actions right afterwards too. What an incredible moment, and what an incredible chapter. What I'd say would have to be my single favorite part of this chapter though, is this one-off line from Hinae. The more you treasure something, the more willing you must be to part with it, lest your imparted value begin to damage the very treasure you hold so dear. This idea is central to Silent Sky and the relationship between Takeru and Serika. But reading those words laid bare like that changed not only the way I looked at the main story of Chaos Child, but also my own life as well. I think I needed to hear those words a lot sooner than I actually did. As I'm sure a lot of you know, I grew up constantly moving from country to country and from city to city. And while I'd more or less gotten used to saying hello and goodbye to people all my life, one of my most recent moves, the move right after finishing my undergrad, really gutted me because of how close I'd become with my friends there. After leaving, I would constantly have dreams about seeing them, and I would yearn to be with them again. Every few months, whenever I'd have the opportunity, I'd take a weekend trip back just to visit. But in doing so, I had increasingly come to feel as though I was returning to a place that was no longer my home. And that is where I feel like I was tarnishing a treasure I once held. That sense of closeness I felt with my undergrad friends had somewhat wavered. For the year after finishing my undergrad, I was just working, hardly ever going out to meet and socialize with people. But my friends from my undergrad, who hadn't moved at all, were hanging out with one another day after day for an entire year, and that time can make a huge difference. At the end of the day, I'd been holding on to these sentiments and perceptions of others that I needed to let go a lot sooner than I did. If I hadn't taken so many trips to visit, I don't think I would have somewhat diminished the value of the treasure I once held. So sometimes you do need to let go of the people you care deeply about. And it's crazy how it's a line from Hinae of all people that made me internalize that. Speaking of Hinae, let's move on to discussing her chapter, which, continuing off of the trend established by the first two chapters, was also superb. Honestly, I think Hinae underwent more character development in this chapter than in the entirety of the main game of Chaos Child. At this point in time, Hinae is no longer able to tell truth apart from lies and people's words, and more than not being able to navigate the world the same way she used to be, she's also completely unsure about what she's doing in the future, a sentiment to which I have definitely related to at earlier points in my life. And the way she finds herself and figures out what it is she wants to do with her life is incredibly inspirational. Building off of what previous chapters established, Hinae and the other former newspaper club members started up the SBSAC, or Students for the Betterment of Student Autonomy and Conditions. And their group is dedicated to improving the lives of CCS victims. So like the previous two chapters, this one also delves heavily into commentary on society and its treatment of victims of natural disasters and those with disabilities. And I think there's really two major highlights of this chapter that stuck with me. The first was a series of interactions between Hinae, Senri, and the two boys they'd been seeing, Keisuke and Kota. Seeing Hinae and Senri move past Takeru's arrest and navigate platonic and romantic relationships was very sweet to see, even if the girls didn't really like the boys romantically in the end. Even the more serious discussions between the four of them are some of the most compelling from the Chaos Child subseries. The one they had on being ghosted from a part-time job really stood out to me because in spite of all the legislative protection that marginalized groups of people have on paper, in practice, they face all sorts of discrimination and challenges in the workforce all over the world. And having two brothers with disabilities, I don't think what's presented in the novel is unbelievable or hyperbolic in any way. The novel's showcase of the opposite perspective with Keisuke's mother and the school staff was also pretty realistic in my eyes. In story, they don't see CCS patients and Hekkyo students as human beings capable of making their own decisions, but rather as mere victims. And in doing so, they often bypass the children's opinions and experiences, even though they're the ones living with their conditions. And that leads into the second main highlight of the chapter, Hinae's speech. Genuinely, that was incredible. Easily one of the most memorable parts of Children's Revive. In the spur of the moment, she delivers a legendary speech culminating in a call to action and for collaboration from parents and faculty. But at the crux of her speech was storytelling. As Senri tells Hinae just before it's time to deliver her speech, when you wish to convey something to an audience, All you truly need to get your point across is a story and a few concrete examples to reinforce it. And she takes it to heart, using personal storytelling with the example of all the societal and mental bullshit they had to deal with when going on the double date. Her speech sure captivated the in-story audience, but it also captivated me, as did Senri's advice there. I definitely need to heed those words myself. All in all, this was another amazing part of Children's Revive. Moving on from Hinae's chapter and into Mio's chapter, the chapter of the novel that made me cry. From the get-go, this part of the novel heavily engages in characterizing Mio. After all, Mio is a central focus in the majority of Chaos Child side material, and this chapter is like a culmination of all the development she's undergone over the course of the subseries. Her upbringing, her experiences at the Coleman Institute, her journey throughout the main story of Chaos Child, and of course, everything she undergoes in Love Choo-Choo. Yet even so, the highlight of this chapter has little to do with Mio at all. It's the reunion she sets up between Yuto and Ito. I'm sure a number of us were wondering how Yuto felt about what Ito had done to Yui. Ito may not have been in his senses, but it was ultimately his body that had been used to murder Yui. When they met again, as expected, Ito was unable to so much as look Yuto in the eye out of pure guilt. But what does Yuto do? It would have been perfectly understandable if he lashed out in pure hatred. But no, he gives him a hug, crying out that it wasn't his fault. And no matter how many times I read this scene, I can't help but become an emotional wreck. What an unbelievably cathartic moment, probably the novel-defining scene. And lastly, there's the Senri and Serika chapters, both of which are extremely short. The Senri chapter is just another brief, yet deeply emotional letter to Takeru, like the earlier intermissions. But in the end, it doesn't feel like her chapter's length matters, because she already had the earlier intermission chapters to herself and remained a prominent figure throughout the other chapters of the novel. And one thing I like about Senri's chapter is that despite it being presented in the novel before Serika's chapter, it was written afterwards, reflecting her perspective on their final encounter. In that sense, perhaps it does feel worthy of being a numbered chapter because it's the ending of the novel presented from one perspective, and I feel as though that makes the final Serika chapter feel so much more meaningful that way. Serika's chapter is only just a bit longer than Senri's, but it shows what she's up to after Silent Sky and also reaffirms its conclusion in that she needed to be apart from Takeru and the original game's cast. And now, she's living her own life with her own new friends as a normal girl, just as Takeru wished for. And while not as gut-wrenching and memorable as Silent Sky's ending, it felt like it was a very fitting send-off to the characters and story of Chaos Child. It reminds me of just how much the game and its themes really meant to me, and I think it was a needed addition to Chaos Child's story. In any case, please let me know your thoughts on Children's Revive. Is it one of your favorite pieces of Side-to-Be side material like it is for myself? And if so, what did you like most about it? I'd love to hear your perspectives. Special thanks to NS2C, Chris G. Link, Blabbity Anarovan, and Fasty. With that in mind, see you around everyone. Happy 11th anniversary to Chaos Child.